Today, we're talking about climbing the CO2 performance ladder in construction. Construction is one of the heaviest emitting industries within the world globally, both on an indirect level because of the energy usage of the buildings they construct, as well as the embodied carbon, the carbon that is generated both from the raw materials that are used, as well as the activities within construction. Now, for a sustainability manager in construction, the main challenges are not only energy use, how construction activities are organized, not only the raw materials, but as well the data connecting all of it. There is, in construction companies are very fragmented. They exist of dozens of different entities. They have multiple data owners on a wide range of ESG topics. They may be done acquisitions in the past. They also have, for each building or each construction project, different subcontractors, different partners, and they also have very complex supply chains. They don't just purchase 3 products, they purchase thousands of them, thousands of different types for thousands of different projects. That means if you want to report, if you want to collect data, and if you want to drive decarbonization, it becomes a really complex puzzle because you need to source data from so many different points. You need to compile that into different reports for different compliance frameworks. That means that creates a lot of administrative workload. It means it takes a lot of manual repetitive tasks to collect this data, inform people, and get people involved in the compliance part of it, but the decarbonization part of it as well. But today, I'm talking about CO2 Performance Ladder. Measuring carbon is not only about compliance, it's more and more becoming a competitive or a competitive element in the sense that the CO2 Performance Ladder promotes, let me quickly. The CO2 Performance Ladder promotes a carbon management system. It will help you take into account how can you increase your carbon maturity over time. But it also serves as a public procurement tool. Now, in the Netherlands, as you can see on my screen, it has already been widely rolled out. And in the Netherlands, it already serves as a differentiator in public tenders, as you can gain premiums, you can gain discounts depending on how high on the CO2 performance ladder you are. In Belgium, the pilot phases was in 2019, and in the coming years, more pilot projects were rolled out. But from 23-24 onwards, it has been widely rolled out to a wide range of products and in public tenders. That means that measuring carbon isn't just about compliance, it's also about winning tenders, and it's also about complying to national legislation. More and more we see in France, in the Netherlands, in Denmark, that there are legislative frameworks coming into place that require that you calculate carbon on a project level, on a building level, and even in the future that there will be mandates on how much energy a certain building can use and how much embodied carbon can be generated during the construction of a specific building. Now, today's conversation is grounded in how a real construction company is dealing with this information. Let me just quickly. It's grounded in how a Class 8 construction company deals with this problem, how they tackle the CO2 performance ladder. We're talking to Cordeel Group, and more specifically, we're talking to Simon Maillet, who is a sustainability manager responsible for pushing the sustainability and decarbonization agenda forwards. My second guest is Jerome Cloetens, who is the CEO of Palau, and Palau specifically helps companies with the report drafting, the automating of the different ESG compliance and compliance frameworks, and drafting different documents and reports for CO2 Performance Ladder, for CSRD, and different legislative frameworks. I want to welcome Jerome and Simon to the webinar.
Hey, nice to be here.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here.
Thank you, Simon and Jerome. I'm also really glad you could be here today. I was a bit confused because you disappeared from my screen, but now I can see you are back. Now, perfect. Before we dive into the questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about practicalities. So we're going to talk about 2 aspects of the CO2 performance ladder today. we're going to talk about first monitoring CO2, so how to collect the data to report, but also to make more effective decarbonization decisions. That will be what we cover first. And then we'll go into the nitty-gritty of decarbonization and then actually look for the highest steps 2 and 3 of the CO2 Performance Ladder. How can you decarbonize more effectively in construction? Now, before we get started, and before I ask Simon a lot of interesting questions, I want to ask the audience. I've generated a Mentimeter. I hope you can see it on my screen right now. You can scan the QR code and then fill in 2 questions, or you can go to menti.com and give in the code 76568823. And then when you do that, you can respond to 2 questions. The questions first relate to what step of the CO2 Performance Ladder are you on? And maybe I'll give a short insight for people who are not familiar with the updated framework of the CO2 Performance Ladder. So there was an update in 2025, which reduced the levels from 5 to 3 for people who are still maybe in the old system, as it is only phased out until 2027. Levels 1 to 3 of the previous system are now step 1, and levels 4 and 5 of the previous system are now step 2, more or less, just to give a little bit of context. Maybe Simon, you can tell me a bit more. Cordeel Group, where are you at the CO2 Performance Ladder today?
Yeah, at Cordeel Group. So Cordeel Group is a really diverse construction group, and that is operating in Belgium, the Netherlands, but also in Bulgaria and Serbia. But for the CO2 Performance Ladder, we chose not the complete group to certify for the CO2 Performance Ladder, but only a couple of companies. So this is mainly Cordeel Belgium, Cordeel Netherlands, and then a couple of our production companies that are also here present on the site in Temse. We started in 2021 with the whole trajectory, and all the credits go to my colleague Kevin, to be honest here. He started it all up, and also he's mainly driving the CO2 Performance Ladder, but I work closely together with him. And we are, since 2021, we are on the level 3 of the old system. And by the next audit, which is in roughly 2 months, we are going for the step 2 in the new methodology. Also because we are already working on our CSRD carbon footprint a lot. This is what I'm doing on group level. So there we're already working a lot on this scope 3. So that's just a logical step to also then go there.
Okay. So as you can see, step 1, step 2 is a bit, I think, where most companies are, especially since the revised edition. As we look at the responses, we can also see that most people are in step 1 and 2. Obviously, there are also some people who might not, for who CO2 Performance Ladder is not the most relevant framework. But I think most companies are within the step 1, step 2 level. I'm glad to see that already a couple of them are also on the step 3 or in the net zero category of the CO2 Performance Ladder. Now, as I talked about in the beginning, I first want to start out with the difficulties pertaining to data collection. I'll quickly stop sharing so we can look at each other a little bit more. With the challenges regarding data collection. Now, for a lot of companies, data collection is a difficult task. It takes a lot of work, a lot of manual repetitive processes. Simon, could you tell me a bit more? Is it the same for construction or is it even worse?
The main difference of construction compared to, for example, a production environment is that we are not fixated at one spot. So basically, we have all our construction sites. I think for the boundary of companies that we're working with on the CO2 Performance Ladder, we have roughly 50 construction sites per year, something between 30 to 40 to 50 construction sites. And yeah, these obviously change constantly. So they might stop. They might be in completely different phases of the one, also from energy consumption point of view and material point of view. So yeah, just to be able to do a proper monitoring on all of these different construction sites, and also in construction, what we often do, like on the really big projects, we are not working alone as a contractor, but we work together with the partner, like kind of in a joint venture, and then also their data gathering is a bit more complex because they might lay at a different partner or something. So it's just like having constant changes in the type of base that you have. And then it's always like teaching your colleagues to collect the proper information. But this is something that was like a bit of a challenge in the first 2 years, I would say, but now we are pretty proficient in that.
Mm-hmm. And then maybe can you tell me a bit more what was challenging in the previous years? Well, what did take some time for people to catch on to how it worked, or what was challenging there?
Yeah, and we were working like geographically pretty widespread. And so also the kind of suppliers that you would have are changing constantly. And I think for now we only talk about scope 1 and 2, but also there it's that depending on where you would purchase your fuel for construction site might change from some times, and or sometimes even colleagues move from offices that you don't even know beforehand. So just getting like this governance point of view straight. Was a bit of a challenge in the beginning.
Do you then have like a process in place? I know you work with us to do data collection, but do you then for your internal, the data owners, the stakeholders, do you have a process in place to inform them in January each time, I need this from you, while we're starting the cycle again? Do you have a set couple of steps you run through for maybe even new people as well?
Yeah, we have pretty clear process for that. And also the big advantage is that, for example, for our energy consumption, we work together with, I think, just 2 energy suppliers. And so there we can even centrally just onboard their systems and extract all the information so that we don't have to burden the project leaders on site. We try to do as much as possible from central perspective, also with our fleet department, for example, so that we keep kind of control on that and try to be fast as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, really interesting. I'll maybe segue it. We're talking about data collection very generally. Maybe let's segue it a bit into the decarbonization topic or the carbon topic specifically, since a lot of data relates to activity data, spend-based data, and so on. Now, when we look at a construction company's footprint, we see, scope 3 is dominated by purchased goods and services, as it is with many companies, production companies as well. Could you talk to me a bit about how data collection worked before you even worked with like a tool like ClimateScamp, how you manage that there, and then how you do it now, and then specifically how it works better or why you did that change?
Yeah. So I think the most important insight is indeed that the biggest part of our carbon footprint comes from the materials that we purchase to build. Mm-hmm. And for us, that's 97.4%. So that's really the vast majority. We already started like 2 years ago. So in 2023, we did the first spend-based evaluation of our scope 3 emissions. That means that we took a look in our accounting software and our ERP package, and then we saw how many euros of costs we had with a certain supplier, and we linked pretty generic emission factors to that. Mm-hmm. And this led to certain emission factors. And that's a great start to get an insight on where is the emissions coming from, but it's also really generic and not granular at all. The other challenge that we have is that, we have not only one ERP system, but many different ones. And none of them is working the way that I would need it to. So none of these ERP systems I can today just get like a proper extract of, for example, how many cubic meters of concrete did we purchase? How many square meters of aluminum facade did you place at a certain project? So that means if you want to step further than only that spend-based idea, we need to involve our suppliers to get more insights.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then maybe when we're talking about, because I'll come back to supplier engagement a little bit later, but maybe let's take a look at what data points people are. So there's another Mentimeter. There is a second question where people can submit the different data points and documentation that you have already calculated in your organization. So did you do corporate footprint? Did you do product footprints? Did you do EPDs already, reduction targets and action plans? just to know a bit, what are the data points that are currently already being calculated or documented? While this is running, I will quickly ask Simon. There is a lot of information to collect. You're talking about going from spend-based to activity-based. I know quantities is a very big problem within your industry with the subcontractors, etc. Could you talk to me a bit more about what for you is really relevant to have? Is it all of it? Is it maybe these are the great first steps if we get this from suppliers? What are you looking for as a Cordeel group to receive as information?
Yeah. So at Cordeel, and I think this relates to many of my colleagues who are in the call today as well, we work with a really lean sustainability team. It's me and my colleague Isabel, and I'm doing most of the operational work, definitely when it comes to the carbon topic and then CO2 measuring. So this means we need to focus. And then just going to go on two sides there. So on the one hand, it's clear that from these, as I said before, from our carbon emissions is 97.4%. It's clear when we want to make an impact, we need to work on scope 3. This is why we are working ourselves as Cordeel with the LCA models, so a bit of life cycle assessments, to really take a look at the kind of projects that we're building. We're getting an insight per material, what the carbon footprint is of that, and then can try to decrease that with design adaptations. And just to get another idea of how important scope 3 is, we had a huge project called Nexus Logistics. That's our concept for future-proof logistics. And there we compared our way of building our Nexus Logistics concept with the classical way of how industrial buildings are being built, often in Belgium today. And the difference was 38% in embodied carbon, but it was like 2,400 tons of CO2. And that's basically the same as Cordeel Bulgaria and Cordeel Netherlands as is component 2, just with one construction project. So it's clear you need to work on that. And at the same time, there are so many things in construction that are important. We talk about circularity, biodiversity as well, water consumption. And that's with that small team, we decided we need to focus now in that phase where we are in, and we're probably in the next 2-3 years when engaging with our suppliers. And the information that we really need now are the product carbon footprints. So that's basically the life cycle phase A1 to A3 of the materials. This is where mostly often the biggest impact is. When then a supplier has an EPD, so an environmental product declaration, that's amazing. That helps us even more, but we will definitely not request that to our suppliers in the near future. But having a good view on what the product carbon footprint is, that's super important to us.
Okay, so maybe to summarize, product carbon footprint, absolutely EPD, nice to have, but not necessary. When you look at these other data points, so corporate footprints, corporate carbon footprints, reduction targets if they have it, decarbonization plans, are these also relevant for you?
Yes, I would say that depends on the type of supplier as well. But if you would go to the suppliers of, for example, steel, concrete, they have obviously huge scope 1 as well in their operations. So there it is material to us as well to know this as well and to get an insight on that. But mainly what we need to know is what is the embodied carbon, what is the scope 3 of the materials that you deliver to us. And yes, that's just like that's getting a picture right now. What did we do in the previous year? But we obviously want to look into the future as well. And therefore, it's for us super interesting to know where are our suppliers going? What are their reduction targets in the future? What are the action plans they are taking to get to these reduction targets? Because obviously we can't do it alone. So we always work together with partners, and we need our partners as well to reduce together. So we need an idea of what they're wanting to do.
Okay. All right, very interesting. We'll come back a little bit later, the role that supplier engagement, etc., plays for decarbonization, how that actually helps decarbonization. But maybe first, let's take a step back. We're talking about CO2 Performance Ladder, and I'm going to call our other guest speaker to the stage. We're also going to talk about report drafting, because obviously CO2 Performance Ladder, not only is it a public procurement tool, it is a compliance framework, specifically having different steps, different documentation, and audit process as well. So could you talk to me a little bit more? There are many different compliance frameworks besides CO2 Performance Ladder, like CSRD, like national legislation. Do you, from the data points we collected, not only carbon, but ESG, is it easy to quickly draft different documents and comply to different frameworks using the same types of data points, or is it actually a whole separate process? Maybe you both, starting with Jerome, can answer this question for me.
Yeah, I'll definitely first have to say it's super exciting to see Simon's story and how impressive with such a lean team. But yeah, indeed. So here, especially now with the latest technology, if you mimic your organization properly, if you have an organizational structure digitalized, you have all the data well documented, you can really leverage AI in incredible amounts. There's a lot of data that overlaps, especially with CSRD, like the energy consumption mix, basically the GHG inventory. There's a lot of data that you can reuse. And a lot of the frameworks are actually doing quite a lot of effort to map or to at least try to make the requirements quite similar. The CO2 Performance Ladder is one of them. The gas coverage, the transition plans, and so on with the new version is overlapping quite a lot with E1 from CSRD. So there's a lot of data that can be reused. Of course, E1 is, or CSRD is, let's say it's scoring you for how faithful you answer your questions, and CO2 Performance Ladder is scoring you how ambitious you are and how you're able to. So yeah, but especially on now that the fact that the new version has transition plans and so on, there's quite some overlap, and with the technology nowadays, if you can really map the requirements. I think maybe Simon, you can share from your experience, but the main thing is translation of requirements. Terminology is always different between frameworks, and if you have the core data, you can really move on pretty fast and set up that audit trail that when you get audited, you don't get asked that many questions.
Yeah, for us, what we have to take a look at as well is what is the boundary of companies we report on. On the group level, we report on all the companies that are in the Cordeel group, given their consolidation as well. And for the CO2 performance, it's a like smaller footprint, smaller boundary of companies. But indeed, if we have all the information, like via climate can be imported all the information on a company basis into Palau. So we have their perfect footprint of all these companies to be seen, and then we can basically just like pick the companies we want to report on and put that into a certain framework, so that we have like being more efficient with the time we have, not trying to draft everything by hand, but using the technology there is.
Okay. Would you say CO2 Performance Ladder and CSRD are the main frameworks you have to comply to, or are there many other aspects of national legislation where you need to draft documentation as well?
For us at Cordeel, on an entity level, on a group level, these are the most important ones that we work with. But yeah, then in the later space, when you go much more granular on a building level, there is so much to come on the new EPBD, where you then need to report on the carbon footprint on the building level. That's again another story. But
maybe from our side, what we see a lot is on construction, at least is CO2 Performance Ladder, either entity level, and then also EcoVadis and CDP sometimes. But the good thing here is if you have all that data documented, if a client comes to you and be like, oh, we also need EcoVadis now, or you want to get this, then you can quickly move all that data into that framework. It's usually around 5-6 frameworks or certifications, depending how you want to call them, that the companies, either at group level or entity level, want to fulfill.
Okay. I want to move on to actually a sub question related to this, and it is for both of you, but it has a different nuance. Simon, I know you already post a lot in the beginning of the year about compliance season and about like the first couple of months of the year, going deep into data collection, going deep into this report drafting. Do you feel that it is maybe excessive, that because of the amount of work you need to do for compliance reasons, for data collection reasons, that it postpones actual decarbonization work to much later in the year? Or do you think all of it is necessary, or does it need to be improved somehow?
Yeah, I would definitely say that in the first 4 months, my main job is working on definitely on the CSRD reporting front. I'm not mainly talking about CSRD, but that's really intertwined as well with the CO2 Performance Ladder or data collection in general. It just takes time to get all your colleagues on board and get them into reporting mode again. So for me, it's definitely the case that a lot of the projects we normally work on are a bit on hold, or that I really have to focus really drastically on what I'm working on besides reporting in that phase. So I had the feeling that it went much smoother this year, as we have two new tools already included, but it takes time. And that time goes away from doing the actual work.
All right. And then my other part of this question goes towards Jerome. Obviously, as you are involved with many different companies, complying to many different frameworks, doing a lot of this report drafting work, what advice would you give? Because Simon talked about it the first couple of years, we needed to find how this process worked for data collection. I assume it will probably be a bit the same for report drafting as well. CSRD, we're looking at the updated wave, having to measure data starting from next year for 2028. If you can give advice to people maybe earlier in this process than Cordeel, or having seen many different industries tackle this, what are the problems? How can they do it better or more efficiently? This report drafting, this compliance part of it.
I think the idea here is to think long term. So think about it like every year should do 20% of the work less. So Simon did quite a big amount of work this year because new organizational setup, getting all the entities on board and so on. But next year, I think it's fair to say you'll have at least 20-30% less of work. If you create a proper process, everything is documented, delegated, but with the least amount of effort from your contributors. Whenever we look at our clients, the main thing is all your contributors at these different entities, you have to make life as easy as possible for them. This is not their job. Nobody's too excited about this, and there is technology for this. There is ways to keep the stakeholder engagement in a very easy manner. So I would really invest in like making it as easy as possible for your contributors. AI is really a good use case there because you can translate requirements, you can simplify requirements, you can detect if they added the right answer or not. And then once you have all of that, then the idea is that your setup gets easier and easier. We do see companies that are already spending 1 month, 2 months a year on CSRD. And I do believe, of course, not for all, especially if they have a lot of different entities, but in the years to come, it's only going to get easier. Regulation, the European Commission also knows it has to be easier. So keep on investing. This is the worst that will ever be in the long term. At least and I think it is incredibly valuable having all of this data publicly available and assured, because it's going to make sustainability as a whole 10 times easier. We saw this yesterday, Simon, when we were doing the benchmarking, how powerful it is when you have so much data, high quality data publicly available.
All right. You've already mentioned it. You dropped the AI keywords into your explanation. Obviously, data collection, sending questionnaires, filling in data points, uploading Excels, importing Excels, like drafting these responses from these data points. There's a lot of opportunity for automation, for speeding up this process. But it's also very critical because you talked about it. The data has to be correct, validated. It needs to be proper because you are going to report on this as a company. You are going to use it it to make decisions. Could you both talk to me a little bit more? Maybe Simon, you can start where you feel that AI and automation in general really helps you in increasing efficiency, but also in what aspects do you feel that human judgment, human people, human checkpoints are still really necessary?
I'm convinced that the human still needs to be in the driver's seat. So the human kind of needs to be the brain and the AI needs to be the executor. So then definitely in the very first phase of determining of what do I want, what do I need, and which kind of data do I, for example, want to collect. This is where I as human need to be super crystal clear. And as well, then the AI should start, the technology should start to do a lot of the work as possible. And then I obviously need to be in the quality control. But I'm convinced that technology can take over a lot of topics, especially when you look into narratives and text drafting, checking on compliancy of what you need to report on, whether what you deliver, whether that's already matching the compliance necessary. So there I see huge relevance. But also later then in dashboarding, for example, or just doing analysis of data. Again, human always needs to be the one who prompts, who says, I want that concretely here and needs to do the quality control. But yeah, there is a lot to be gained, I think. And I used AI now pretty heavily in the last couple of months, a year, and I think it saved me at least 30% of my time. And I'm optimistic that it will do even more. And I'm still, I'm super critical and super skeptical when it comes to data quality. And I'm still convinced that we're doing really well on that.
All right. And Jerome?
Yeah, I completely agree there. I think companies, for example, like Cordeel, that have for example, a nature positive target by 2050, it's highly ambitious. You need all the help you can get. And you need to move as fast as you can. So yeah, use the technology as much as you can, I would say. At Palau, we have two clear on our mission statement. We have two clear statements that we try to think of. One is own the judgment, delegate the work. So we always tell that to the clients. You're the one owning the judgment. You can delegate the work to your agents, but keep it that way. Keep your brain functioning. I think there's just so much hype around AI. Thinking that it's gonna go, it's going incredibly fast, but it's still a tool you prompt. Before we didn't cook with fire, now we cook with fire. You sometimes cook with fire, sometimes you don't cook with fire, but it's not like a god, if I would say. And then the second one is make the sustainability role irreplaceable. There's a lot of AI companies pitching that it's gonna, let's say, replace your work, do your report in 10 seconds, or do all of this and that, and remove the expert. We are a firm believer to do it the other way around, is giving the best tools to the expert so that they can reach their targets and they can reach their everything that they need to do. So and then it's, for AI to truly work well, it's all about governance. If you look at, for example, software engineering at Google or any of these really large companies, they have 90% of their engineers already, let's say, AI native. So they're coding with AI. And it's purely because all of their documentation of their code base of all of that data is really well documented. There's processes for everything. The AI never gets lost because for each step of the way, it has a clear manual of what to do next. And that's the same thing goes for sustainability. If you have clear governance, if you have clear documentation, then you can really 10x or 100x the amount of work you can do with AI. So there's a lot of potential. And remember, it's not God, it's a tool.
Yes, so have the specific guardrails also in place. That will bring me to the second part, which I talked about earlier of this webinar today. We have talked a lot about data collection. We have talked a lot about reporting, but obviously these are means to an end, the end actually being decarbonization, reducing the impact that businesses and our economies in general have on the environment. Now, I'm just going to quickly provide some information for the people who are not on the CO2 Performance Ladder or are considering it, also with the new update before I go into the decarbonization, because a lot of elements will come back. So it has been, the new update was 4.0. It's been rolled out. The previous one is being phased out until 2027, January 2027, I think. And now it's been simplified a lot. And like Jerome said before, it's also much more ambitious, or it's much more taking into account long-term ambitions. So if you just simply phase it, step 1 is own operations. It's scope 1 and 2, reporting on it, reducing it, having a plan in place to reduce the impact of your own operations. But it's very specifically within the own organization. If we then go towards step 2, then we're really talking about value chain. Simon mentioned it before, 97% comes from purchased goods and services. So obviously the biggest impact is to be found within his value chain, not only within the operations of Cordeel itself. So step 2 takes what step 1 started, but applies it to scope 3, which is much broader. It will also require you to set near-term reduction targets. It will also require you to build transition plans to how you are going to achieve these targets. And then step 3, which was previously missing, is actually the long-term game. How are we going to reach net zero or near net zero? What does that look like? How are we going to work together, not only with our suppliers, but also with customers, with partners within the ecosystem? So that is the CO2 Performance Ladder. I just wanted to quickly explain it before we dive into how Simon experiences this tool. I want to make one small caveat before I continue. You can always, for the people present in the webinar, if you are a supplier of Cordeel, or maybe you're just interested in the topic, if you want to ask questions of any of us, you can post them in the chat or on the Q&A section on top, and we will answer them in about 10-15 minutes time. Now, let's go into the decarbonization part of the CO2 Performance Ladder. Maybe first, before we start, Simon, can you tell to me a little bit more about what you like about CO2 performance, but maybe also what you dislike about it?
Yeah, so what I really like about it, I've been working with it already for, I think, 5 years, also before Cordeel in my role as consultant. And I think it's super accessible. So it's a really easy methodology, definitely when you look at scope 1 and 2, and it gives you great insights. You actually don't even have to hire consultants for that, because if you just dive a bit into the methodology, you can do that yourself. And that gives you really good tools to also bring it to the boardroom, for example. So for us, also the CO2 Performance Ladder was is a license to operate for one of our projects. So we need to have it, so that it's really clear for the management. We have to work on that. And because we worked already since 2021 on that, or even 2020, I think, for some companies, we started a lot of decarbonization of scope 1 and 2 really early on. And that has huge effects. I mean, it's super boring to talk about electrical vehicles, but that's our biggest scope 1 emissions. And because we started really early with that, we are today, have reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions with 50.4% in absolute figures. So we came from somewhere, I don't know, like 12,000 tons, and are now down at 5,500 tons. And that's because we were early on with that really accessible system. So I think it's a great system to work on, definitely when you're starting your company.
Do you feel, because I don't know if this has changed in the meantime, but I remember a conversation we had earlier in the year that there is not as SBTi guidance for construction companies specifically. Do you feel that CO2 Performance Ladder fills this hole for setting reduction targets, providing this pragmatic way towards decarbonization?
And indeed, so the SBTi has a guidance for developers, kind of, or for buildings, but not for contractors. And so that we build for someone, but so we're always linked to, dependent on someone like a developer as well. But I think it fills the void in a bit, definitely when you would go to step 3. But on the other hand, I think that the SBTi is also much stricter in terms of target setting, although that a slight change recently. But I think they both also work together, because if you need to go to a net zero plan on step 3, that's kind of the same as you would do for SBTi. So I think it's a bit going hand in hand.
All right. Then, okay, that's maybe your experience with CO2 Performance Ladder, but let's talk impact. Let's talk the different activities, that 97% coming from scope 3. Could you give me maybe like a holistic view of what are like the main spear points or the spearheads that Cordeel focuses on when it comes to decarbonization, both in near and long term?
Yeah. So on the one hand, what's really important to know is our main work, where we are in the CO2 Performance Ladder, is, and what we are most known for, is being a contractor. So we work for a public or private client. This means they have normally pretty clear ideas what they want, and we basically have to build that. There are like many tenders that are really strict, where we are not even allowed to hand in alternatives, and then we can basically not do a lot except of following their requirements. So that's also one of the reasons that we work more in design and build on construction team projects, because there we can kind of steer as well the way we build. So together with an architect and our client, we work together to come to the best possible project. And this gives us, in terms of engineering and standing of what we're doing, an advantage, but also we have ways to go for alternative materials. Also, when you take a look at the type of projects that you choose, because I often hear that also from fellow contractors that they say, yeah, we are only contractor, we cannot really have ambitious targets, but you can choose the type of projects you're working on. For example, we are working now for a couple of years already a lot on renovation projects in Brussels mainly. And when you there see the giant structures that keep intact, that stay, this is like you save, I don't know, tens of thousands of cubic meters concrete that you don't need to pour again. Also, this helps a lot, and we're now doing almost 15% of our group revenue comes from renovation projects. So this helps us as well down the line to decrease our carbon. We have a huge hope in bio-based products. We went so far that we even bought a hemp insulation factory in Germany by the end of the year, because we really believe that bio-based products will be a big future in reducing embodied carbon and even storing that. And for the rest, really going into our main drivers of emissions, that's concrete, steel, aluminium. There are alternatives on the market. There are suppliers that are really forward-thinking in reducing these impacts, and so that choosing other types then of products, but also in our own production, see concrete, where we produce precast concrete. There we're in the steering wheel ourselves to change the formulas of the concrete we produce. And now there, with the work that we did, we are 33% below the Belgian average market in terms of embodied carbon.
All right. Maybe I want to pick in on this a little bit, because we had a conversation earlier about pricing is an issue, because buildings cost a lot of money to make, to set, the materials, etc. Obviously, when you're applying for tenders, when you're want to win projects, you're fighting, or like you're competing against your competitors within the market. So their pricing obviously will also be a very strenuous topic always, because it is a very important point to win or lose a project. But can you maybe talk about how you work together with, let's say, these other major contractors to drive decarbonization? Because then maybe pricing becomes less of an issue because you do it as an industry, or you try to push the agenda forward there.
Yeah. So it's a really good remark, and that still stays the reality. Definitely in the last, I think, 3 years, what happened on a geopolitical frame is a complete shit show that has a huge impact on pricing as well. And this is where construction really suffered on as well. So today, it's still the reality that the majority of projects are being awarded on the basis of pricing. We do see, luckily, that more and more of our clients are at least choosing for a certain percentage that sustainability is part of the evaluation criteria, where we then kind of give our vision on how are we able, with what we do, to decrease the impact of that building. So that's really positive to see that more and more of these criteria are coming, but still price remains the most important. But I'm really happy that with a lot of our competitors, contractors, at least I'm in really good relationship with my kind of counterparts in sustainability. And we work together in many working groups at Buildwise, other BBA on federation level, that we try to decrease the impact also by in communication with our suppliers. And that's important step to have some kind of partners, even though they're competitors. But most of us have the same idea where we need to go, but it's still it stays an uphill battle.
All right. We talked about partners. Maybe let's move into the supplier part of it. We talked a little bit about it earlier when we were talking about purchase goods and services. Now you work together with us to engage suppliers. Could you tell me a little bit more how supplier engagement is a lever for decarbonization, and maybe what you've learned from the process of engaging with suppliers?
Yeah. So for us, it's clear, although we are kind of a vertically integrated company that produces a lot itself, we still are heavily reliant on our partners, on our suppliers. And so if you want to, we could have a net zero ambition by 2030, which is not reality, but we could have that. But if our suppliers are not having the same idea, we will never go there. So we need to see together with our suppliers how can we reduce our impact together. And it starts also with getting a view on where we're standing today. And in the previous year, I thought I'll do it myself. So we had mostly spend-based calculation on Scope 3, and I sent to, I think, 25 companies. I sent emails on, hey, can you give me an idea of what your footprint is with the materials that you produce for us? The feedback was really, really low. But also that has again to do with that lean team there is. So it's really hard to reach out to 100 suppliers, for example. And this is actually why we chose for ClimateCamp. And I think that your colleague Fien, she really saved me a lot of work, because we defined together 100 top suppliers, and they were all contacted by ClimateCamp. And so your colleague Fien, she set up calls with these suppliers. So we didn't send out a survey, say, please fill in and hope for the best. But she contacted our contact partners that we defined together and set up meetings. So we as Cordeel sent an initial email to our suppliers that, hey, you will be contacted by ClimateCamp. But then actually you took over and did the job for us and had these meetings and asked them the kind of questions that we had in terms of our carbon footprint. I was able to join a couple of these calls. It was super interesting. I heard from some suppliers, I never get these questions in Belgium. In the UK, for example, we have to give this information to every tender. In Belgium, no one ever asked us. Other suppliers said, yeah, I don't know what I do need to deliver to you, and no one ever asked it to us in general. And we had like some super mature suppliers on concrete, for example, that were able to give us per construction site all the concrete mixes they sold to us, including an LCA product carbon footprint for all the different mixes. So that's a huge variety, but I think the main messages that I also have for my fellow competitors, we as a sector have to keep on asking our suppliers for this information. Also because otherwise they don't have a business case to invest in that, into carbon footprints, into EPDs. Because if no one ever asks them, their management will say, why would we ever do that? You have no questions. But if like the kind of companies asking for this information constantly, they feel the heat and they will go for that as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think we've learned that during your project, but I think during many projects as well, that it's It's both an incentive. You get this request from a large contractor such as Cordeel, and then it's to the CEO or to the CFO, it's much more commercially relevant to tackle this topic. But also this topic takes time. I've seen a lot when discussing with Fien, for example, it's about how we lack some information and we first need to go looking for it. For example, we have one quantity, but there are 3 different products. And then, okay, give me some time. I'll figure out what the specific quantities for each product type are. And then they can come back like maybe a month later or 2 months later. And they are very willing to, most of the suppliers, but it's more about understanding properly what the company wants, what the data points are, what they mean, what the context is of the information or documentation that needs to be delivered, and then actually getting the time to deliver it, because you don't have it maybe when the question is asked, but you might have it in 2 to 4 weeks. And I think that is very important in supplier engagement. It's like providing incentive, but also giving time and context to actually meet these requirements. Now, we have 10 minutes left in the webinar. I have 2 more questions, and there is also some Q&A, so I'll try to be a bit efficient with my time. My first question relates a little bit to what you said before. In the UK, these questions get asked all the time. I know for a fact there are more and more mandates on like a national level of calculating on project level the emissions related to energy use, the emissions related to embodied carbon. I know in France there will be mandates on caps, how much you can emit during construction, and in energy use. I know Netherlands has full LCA analysis, I think. Denmark. Could you tell me a bit more? Where is Belgium at? Are we leading? Are we following? What is coming?
Yeah, Belgium is far behind, unfortunately. Indeed, you have countries like Denmark that have clear caps on embodied carbon footprint per square meter. And Belgium is now discussing to finally implement the European legislation that we need to have an LCA so that we know what is the carbon footprint. That will start in 2028 and then 2030. But that's just like translating the European legislation into Belgium legislation, and that, yeah, it's just a pity to see that there is not a lot of ambition happening, and it's really strict on how they want to measure that as well. Yeah, Belgium is at the forefront of so many things, like its circularity, for example. But when you take a look at this, it's a bit of a trauma, I think.
Mm-hmm. And you then have to do it because you work also in other countries. So you already have to comply to these mandates or etc. in other countries. So it's a bit weird that you do it in other countries, but then don't have to do it in Belgium.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to maybe quickly switch to a couple of questions, because my final question is a bit of a hopeful one, but maybe let's dive a little bit more into the questions that people have, because I think they are really interesting. I'm going to start with Axel. Axel says, Simon, you mentioned that you will not make EPDs mandatory for your suppliers. What are the main reasons for this? For example, not to exclude smaller suppliers, but doesn't this also make it harder for you to comply with the material passports of buildings that will be required in the future?
It's a good question. Why? Because for a fact, I know how difficult it is to get to an EPD and how much it costs, because we do that as well with some of our companies. So you can easily, if you would do it by a consultant, easily at 10,000 euros per product on an EPD. And that's a burden, I think, on many definitely smaller companies. For now, for us, the product carbon footprint, so the A1 to A3 is sufficient for the majority of products. And also we are not yet like doing that with all our suppliers, but we focus mainly on everything in terms of concrete, steel, aluminium, and timber, and a bit of transport, because there we know we get better data from, and then we will evaluate over the years. But we have to be pragmatic in a point of view, and also just like only asking for clear EPDs will exclude a lot of companies also, because I know how long it takes to get to an EPD, and we don't have time to wait for 2 years for EPDs. We all need to work fast together to tackle this decarbonization issue that we have in construction.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a lot about pragmatism, and it's a lot about cost efficiency, right? Because it's not like you don't have anything else to do, and it's not that you have margins to spare to spend on 10,000 euros on per EPD. That will take me into the next question by Bart. Bart asks, I assume Cordeel is working yearly on approximately 30 construction projects. Each project has probably between 20 to 50 suppliers or subcontractors. To which granularity level, type of materials, do you collect data on these projects? And how much of the data is spend-based? For example, finishing works, and how much categories, tilling, plastering, is that split up? And do you use generic emission factors for these categories?
Yeah, okay, really detailed question. That's nice.
Yeah.
So indeed, we have like this roughly 30 to 50 construction sites, and they change and they geographically spread. That means we often work with completely different subcontractors and or suppliers depending on where the construction site is located. Therefore, we decided definitely for the previous year and probably for next year as well, we will focus on suppliers on ready-mix concrete, precast concrete, foundations. When you look at steel, we look into reinforcement and structural steel, and then look into aluminium facades and a bit of timber, because it's just there we know we will get good activity-based data, so they are able to give us quantities. What we're not yet working on, but will be our next step, is, for example, with HVAC companies. This is, when you look at cost, that's one of our biggest costs are HVAC companies. But there it's really hard to get to good activity-based data, because it's much easier to say 1 cubic meter of concrete as this CO2 and then 1 heat pump that was installed, because there are also not many PDs. And for the rest of the categories that we're not evaluating, we are going indeed on a spend-based way, where we go down to, I think it's mostly the NASA code, and then link that to as good as fitting emission factors as possible. And therefore, the team of Climate Camp was a great help as well to help us go into the granularity. Although it still stays generic with spend-based, we are much more in granular than we were in the past.
All right.
That answers the question.
I hope so as well. Otherwise, you can always send you a LinkedIn message afterwards to get a little bit more context. I know you're very active there as well. Then I'll pose one final question from the chat and one final one from myself. The question from Stan is, hi, Simon, can you share a bit more about bio-based construction alternatives as replacement for the typical emission hotspots for contractors, such as, let's take steel and concrete, for examples. Are these solutions there, and are they ready to be implemented at scale?
Yeah, the solutions are there, definitely. And for example, when you look at the logistical building, industrial building, and you would look at the beams that carries the roof, they are in Belgium mostly made from concrete. But if you don't have crazy sizes, it's even the same price, sometimes even cheaper to go for timber there. Also, finally, the European legislation of the emission trading scheme helps, because that will make cement more and more expensive. Cement is the biggest cost driver for concrete. So at some point, this will become more and more interesting. Also, when you look structure-wise, you obviously always have to discuss this with your clients. But also when you take a look at like the on-topping, so if you would build something on an existing buildings, that's easier also weight-wise to do that with timber, with CLT, for example. And what we're doing at C Concrete, our precast company, we are producing floor plates that are hybrid. So this is a part of a CLT floor, and on that we are pouring concrete, low carbon concrete, and that's kind of the best of two worlds. So you have the nice aesthetics of wood, you have the kind of reducing in carbon, maybe carbon storage of wood, but you also have everything in terms of acoustics and weight and fire safety that concrete has.
All right, that's a
Maybe
really
if I can quickly share something. Simon has a weekly newsletter that I really love, that he always talks about these solutions. I just put it quickly on the chat because I know Simon won't tell us, but it's worth gold for me. It's every Sunday, right? I've learned a lot since I've been subscribed. It's been like 4 or 5 newsletters. So yeah, for everyone.
Thanks a lot, Jerome. Indeed, that's not linked to Cordeel. That's kind of my hobby, but I share to make this more accessible. Thanks.
All right, really cool that you highlighted this, Jerome. We're almost at the end of the webinar, so I'm going to ask you maybe to give a short answer, but we've talked a lot about the challenges in sustainability and data collection. It is a difficult subject and the legislative space does not always help us, but maybe we can end on an optimistic note. Maybe Simon and Jerome, can you both talk to me a little bit about what is your hope in the near future for construction that might be improved or that you might want to work with partners on to accelerate decarbonization?
Yeah, I'm going to give a start. So yes, work in construction and in sustainability in construction is definitely hard. You might not see it, but my beard really got really great the previous 4 years. But it's also super fulfilling to work here, and you know you have like a really big impact with the work as well. Every one of us is spending most of their days in buildings, and this is a real product that stays for many years, and there's luckily more clients having the same idea that we need to decarbonize this. Legislation is coming, and I know it's tough to get everyone on board, but still the impact that you could have in terms of also like carbon saved, for example, is so high in construction that it's really worth going through that.
All right, really cool. And Jerome?
For myself, I think there's just so much potential in the construction industry. We work with a lot of different industries, and to make a business case out of it, to really invest in sustainability, construction seems to me, from all my learnings, one of the cleanest with the highest opportunity. And I think, yeah, especially collaborating with such strong players, like collaborating Climate Camp for Scope 3 emissions, when we get the data into our platform, it makes it so much more higher quality to keep on working on the other tasks. So just the collaboration between the industry and keep on progressing instruments like the CO2 Performance Ladder, they're actual instruments and not just disclosure writing. I think there's a lot of potential to keep this going.
All right. Thank you very much, Jerome. And then I'm going to close out a little bit with first thanking you, Simon, and you, Jerome, for spending the time going through the topic of CO2 Performance Ladder and decarbonization in construction. I think it's really insightful. I think a lot of people got a lot of information from the webinar as well. And then I'm just also going to end on a small plug for the next webinar we do. A lot of sustainability is about getting it sold internally towards CEO, towards CFO, maybe towards external people as well. So our upcoming webinar in 2 weeks, we'll talk about the ROI of sustainability, where we will do 2 very specific cases on purchase goods and services and transport, how you can build the business case of risk, of resilience, of future costs avoided, and really go into the nitty-gritty of how you can build this business case. Once again, thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jerome, for your time, and I wish you a productive rest of the week. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Bye.
Ciao.